and even more unhinged than the wine gala, which had fizzled in spectacular fashion thanks to my gate and Brett's motion-triggered light system. Still, I underestimated how fast she could mobilize chaos. That very afternoon, I got a call from the county property assessor's office, asking if I'd scheduled a reevaluation of my land, because someone had submitted a request on my behalf, claiming recent renovations and new structures. I nearly laughed into the phone, then stopped short when I realized how cunning that was. If Karen could inflate the value of my land and have it reassessed as a commercial use property because of the event activity, she could increase my taxes and generate the illusion that my land was part of her HOA district. It was subtle but dangerous. I told the assessor it was fraudulent, and they agreed to halt the inspection, but now I was officially on defense again. Karen wasn't coming through the gate anymore. She was trying to tear the land out from under me by legal sabotage. I doubled back on everything, updated all county records, reinforced my no-access orders, and even installed a new remote trail cam deep in the woods, near the north boundary where the old horse path used to run. That's when things got even stranger. At first, it was small. The trail cam caught Greg walking that path with a measuring tape and what looked like a teenager holding a homemade drone. They were mapping something. The next day, I saw pink survey tape tied to several trees in a diagonal line heading straight from Karen's yard into mine. At first I thought it might be kids playing, but it was too deliberate. I followed the ribbons one morning and found they ended right at my cabin's waterline inlet. That was no accident. Karen was trying to draw a fake utility corridor, probably to claim that her property shared infrastructure with mine, giving her some ridiculous legal excuse to force community access. I took photos, removed the tape, and left a laminated sign nailed to the tree reading, "Private Utility. Federal offense to tamper." Then I did something Karen wouldn't expect. I invited the county environmental inspector myself. Not because I was worried, but because I wanted documentation, official, legal, bulletproof. The inspector came 2 days later, clipboard in hand, and after 2 hours of walking the property, he confirmed what I already knew. My land was not only fully compliant, but marked and registered beyond typical standard. He even complimented my solar water pump setup. He agreed to write a formal declaration that the land was self-sufficient, unconnected to surrounding parcels, and free of any easement claims. I made 6 copies. But as always, the calm didn't last long. That weekend, Karen tried again, this time with something so absurd it almost made me respect her audacity. Around noon on Saturday, I heard the faint thump of bass coming from down the hill, and within the hour, it grew into a full-blown concert. A real one. With speakers, a small stage, string lights hung between trees, and a sign that read Pine Valley Music Fest. From my upper ridge, I could see it all, hundreds of people gathered in a clearing that wasn't quite her property, but not clearly anyone else's either. And sure enough, the edge of the crowd began to spill toward the lake, with a few bold guests breaking away and walking straight down my path like they had backstage passes. This time I didn't go out. I stayed inside and watched it all from my surveillance feed. 5 different zones triggered alerts. Trespassers on the dock, near the generator, behind the woodshed, and even someone trying to set up a hammock between 2 of my birch trees. I called the sheriff. Not the deputy. The sheriff himself, a guy named Don who'd fished off my dock once 2 years back and liked to brag about catching the biggest trout of his life. I didn't need to convince him. I just sent the footage. 30 minutes later, 2 cruisers rolled up the hill, lights flashing. And here's where it gets wild. Karen, in her finest sequin dress, ran down the hill to intercept them, arms flailing like a stage mom. She tried to convince them that the event was sanctioned by a new nonprofit she'd started called Citizens for Scenic Access, claiming the land was a shared environmental trust zone. One of the deputies actually turned to the other and said out loud, "Did she just make up a trust zone?" The sheriff approached Karen calmly, let her finish her rant, then handed her a formal citation for unlawful assembly, unauthorized use of private land, and failure to comply with county ordinances. She shrieked that she'd sue for harassment, that I was weaponizing the law, that I was a menace to community morale. The sheriff replied, "Ma'am, he owns the land, and you're not above the law just because you host wine parties." She demanded to see the proof. So the sheriff showed her the footage. He had downloaded it from my camera system. When she saw herself on screen, instructing guests to follow the ribbons and use the dock for photo shoots, something broke in her expression. Not guilt, not shame, just pure rage. The kind of rage people feel when they realize their schemes are too public to salvage. The event was shut down. The guests scattered. One of them accidentally backed their SUV into a tree trying to turn around. I heard later they tried to bill Karen for it, claiming she'd said the road was safe. But the story doesn't end there. Because that night, Brett and I installed Phase 3 of the plan. The final measure. Something I'd been saving for the right moment. We built a secondary gate on the North Trail, the old horse path, the one Greg had been measuring. But this one wasn't just a barrier. It was a gate that led nowhere, a false trail that looped back into a swampy thicket full of mosquitoes and poison ivy. We left signs saying authorized access route, just to bait the trespassers. And sure enough, it worked. Over the next 2 days, 3 groups were caught wandering through muck and brambles, swatting at bugs, and trying to figure out why there were no party tents, no scenic views, and certainly no lake. One guy even fell into a shallow marsh and lost his shoe. Brett called it the Karen Maze. I called it poetic justice. But behind the humor, I knew we were nearing the end. Karen had gone from bounce houses to forged paperwork to underground music festivals. She was running out of steam and out of lies. All I needed to do now was give her one last push, a gentle one, but public, legal, and irreversible. Something that wouldn't just humiliate her but would expose. The email from the county land use auditor felt like a lit match drifting toward a leaking gas line, and I didn't even have to light it. I responded immediately, attaching the footage, newsletter scans, the fake HOA flyers, the photos of unauthorized parties, the citation copies, and even a screenshot of Karen's PayPal donation page, which proudly featured the caption, "Help us fund our community events for a better Pine View experience." The reply came the same day, short and to the point. "We'll be in touch shortly. Thank you for your documentation." I didn't know what exactly they were planning, but it was clear that Karen's fantasy kingdom had finally stepped into real-world consequences. Still, I kept quiet. I didn't tell Brett, didn't call the sheriff, didn't even hint at anything on the local forums where people had started whispering about the infamous wine fiasco and the gate standoff. I just waited, patient as ever, tending my garden, oiling the trap mechanism, and letting the rumors grow legs on their own. And grow they did. By Wednesday, I heard that one of Karen's core followers, the woman who used to deliver the HOA newsletters in her golf cart, had abruptly stopped showing up. Someone else said Karen's husband Greg had been spotted removing the pink trail ribbons and muttering about legal exposure. The empire was cracking, but Karen, in true Karen fashion, wasn't done performing. On Friday morning, I found a flyer taped to my mailbox post, wet from dew and printed in bold script. Emergency Community Meeting, Saturday 10 a.m. HOA updates and new bylaws. It didn't say where exactly the meeting would be held, but I could guess. And I did more than guess. I pulled out one of my motion cameras and placed it along the lower trail, near the bend where they usually parked for meetings, and Karen gave her little speeches standing on a plastic storage bin she used as a makeshift podium. Then I went one step further and set up my trail drone. It was a simple quadcopter I used for roof checks, but with its high-def feed and long battery, it would give me a real-time view of the chaos as it unfolded. And I had no doubt it would. Because Karen wasn't about meetings or updates, this was her last performance. A desperate final act, where she'd try to rally her shrinking crowd, puff herself back up, and maybe even redirect blame my way. The last attempt to keep her illusion alive. I got up early Saturday, brewed my coffee, and sat on the porch with the drone feed playing on my tablet. Sure enough, by 9:30, a slow trickle of golf carts and SUVs began making their way down the trail. Not as many as before, maybe 15 people in all, but enough to make it feel like a real event if you didn't know the backstory. Karen arrived last again, this time in a floor-length sundress, clipboard in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. She didn't use the bin this time. Instead, she stood beneath the crooked pine that marked the center of the clearing and raised her voice like a town crier announcing a royal decree. The drone picked up just enough audio to catch phrases like new guidelines, unified vision, and external aggression from non-compliant residents, which was clearly code for me. I was about to shut it off and let the show run its course when something remarkable happened. A white Ford Explorer pulled up the dirt road, not from the usual direction, but from the north, a county vehicle. Two men stepped out wearing windbreakers with embroidered patches on the chest. One held a thick leather binder, the other carried a clipboard. The group quieted immediately. Karen, to her credit, straightened her back and walked over with both arms extended like she was welcoming guests to a resort. The drone mic picked up her voice again. "You must be the officials here to support our application." The taller man nodded once, then opened the binder and said something I couldn't hear. Karen's smile froze. Her hands dropped. The second man spoke, pointing to the fake bylaws Karen had been passing out. Karen snatched them back, as if secrecy now mattered. The conversation grew tenser, and a few people in the crowd began edging away, suddenly very interested in their phones or shoes. One woman looked back toward the road like she might just leave entirely. That's when the taller official stepped forward and raised his voice just enough for the drone to pick it up clearly. "This is not an officially recognized HOA. You've collected money under false pretenses, hosted unpermitted events on private land, and made verbal claims of shared infrastructure that don't exist. You're not being arrested, but we are opening a formal investigation, and you are to cease all organized activity under the name Winding Pines HOA immediately." There was silence. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping. Karen didn't speak. She just stood there, blinking, lips twitching like she wanted to say something clever but couldn't find a single word. A few more cars left. Greg stepped forward, but the officials waved him off and handed Karen a large envelope, then turned and walked back to their Explorer. No sirens, no handcuff, just a slow, bureaucratic death sentence wrapped in a manila folder. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just turned off the drone feed and leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet soak into my bones. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. The difference mattered. Because I never wanted to win some childish feud, I wanted peace. Boundaries. A life without stage moms trying to carve up what they didn't build. By afternoon, the news had traveled faster than the drone ever could. I got texts from 3 neighbors who never cared before, asking what really happened. One of them thanked me for standing up for landowners. Another asked if the HOA was going to refund the dues. I told them I doubted it. Karen wouldn't go quietly, not really. She'd find a new name, a new cause, maybe even a new target. But her fake kingdom had been burned from the inside out, not by fire, but by law, and the smoke would linger long enough that nobody would follow her again. That night, as the sun slipped behind the ridge and the lake glowed in that perfect golden hour light, I walked down to the dock and stood there barefoot, just breathing. No noise. No distant music. No laughter that didn't belong to me. Just frogs, a light breeze, and the distant sound of a screen door creaking open at a house that had finally remembered it was supposed to be quiet. I didn't need a tire trap anymore, or motion lights, or even a gate, because the thing that kept them out now wasn't steel or circuitry, it was truth. Truth, exposed so clearly no one could ignore it. Karen's empire had collapsed under its own weight, and all I'd done was hold the line. But deep down, I knew there was one last ember glowing. One last puff of smoke. Because people like Karen never disappear without leaving a mess. And sure enough, I'd get a knock the next day from someone I'd never seen before, a realtor,